Welcome to Lecture 5, Part 2. In Part 1 of this lecture, we discussed primate research on the trap tube problem, and we saw that this research suggests that primates are not very good at solving the problem, that they seem to lack an understanding of the physical relations involved, and when they do solve it correctly, they seem to rely on a heuristic instead of an understanding of the nature of wholes. And the heuristic seems to be something like insert the stick from the end farthest from the food. And all of that heuristic will allow them to solve certain versions of the problem. They will fail in other versions of the problem. So it's not a very flexible strategy. In this part of the lecture, we're going to be discussing whether we might have better luck with other types of species, in particular avian species, as far as solving trap tube-like problems. And in particular, we're going to be discussing research on New Caledonia crows. And New Caledonia is an island off the coast of Australia where these remarkable birds have been discovered. And a lot of research has been done on them. So the first study I want to talk about is by Chiappe and Koselnik. Using New Caledonia crows, they gave the crows a problem that's similar but not the same as the trap tube problem that is given to primates. So in this version of the problem, they were presented with a horizontal tube, and the tube had food inside, and that food could be located at different distances from the opening. And there was only one opening from which the food could be obtained. So there was 20 trials, and the food could be found at 10 different distances from the open end. And they had to insert a stick and use that stick to pull out the food with their beaks. So also important for this, for understanding the study, is that there were 10 sticks that were presented at any given time, and the sticks had different lengths, and each stick matched the length of one of the 10 distances from the end of the tube. Right, so in each trial they were allowed to inspect the tube and the food where it's located, and at the same time the 10 different sticks, and then they could choose a stick to use to fish out the food. So if they have an understanding of causal relations, right, they should tend to choose a stick that's the correct length given the distance of the food. And they should definitely be very unlikely to choose a stick that is too short. Okay, so this slide includes the data for the two crows that they used. The black bars are for crow number 1. The white bars are for crow number 2. And you can see the inserted figure there, the inserted picture shows you the setup of the problem. You can see the trap tube, and you can see the 10 sticks, and you can see the crow actually selecting one of the sticks. So what did they find? The graph shows 0 is where the crow chooses a stick that's the right length given the distance of the food. Negative numbers would be cases where they chose a stick that's too short, and positive numbers would be where they choose a stick that is too long. And what you can see is that they overwhelmingly tended to choose sticks that are the correct length given the distance. When they do make a mistake, or when they do deviate from the perfect length, is by choosing sticks that are longer than they need to be. They almost never choose sticks that are too short. Alright, so the crows usually chose the correct length, more often than can be expected by chance. And deviations from the required length tend to be in the direction of grabbing sticks that are longer than they need to be, and as I said, they're very unlikely to choose sticks that are too short. Now, as I said, this task isn't identical to the trap tube problem that we mentioned before, but it is similar, right, to one given to primates. But what I want to do now is discuss a study that uses a very similar version to the trap tube problem given to primates. So I'm going to tell you about a study by Taylor, Hunt, Medina, and Gray using New Caledonia crows. They presented them with the trap tube problem. And the important thing about this study is that they showed using various transfer trials that the crows don't seem to be relying, when they solve the problem, when they figure out how to solve the problem, they don't seem to be relying on simple visual heuristics. So they seem to understand something about the nature of holes, like the fact that objects can't move across the surface with a hole without falling into it. And also really cool about this study is that they showed that the ones that could solve the trap tube problem were able to generalize what they learned to a superficially very different problem. Now I've included here a link to the study by Taylor. So he discusses this study in the YouTube clip. So you can either watch it now or watch it after you go through the slides. Either way, it'll help you to understand the slides that I'm going to be going over. So what we have here is the initial trap tube problem that they were trained on. Right, so 6 crows were given the initial trap tube problem, and this one you can see that to get the food out, they'd have to fish it out from the left and drag it over to that side. And you can also see that there's 2 visual cues present. Right, there's yellow discs and the blue rim. Right, and they had these because they wanted to see whether or not the crows are actually forming associations based on these visible cues. They could learn, for example, that you have to pull the food away from the blue rim and across the top yellow disc in order to get the food. And as I said, the subsequent transfer trials were designed to rule out that they're using those kinds of heuristics. So out of the 6 crows, 3 learned to solve the trap tube problem in about 100 trials. And then, as I said, the transfer trials were given to the successful crows, and they wanted to see whether they were relying on these cues. So each of the cues was systematically removed. And for each set of transfer trials, 20 trials were presented. So in the first set of transfer trials, they removed the color discs, but they left the blue rim. Now I want to point out that the bin on the right, the bin on the left is not an actual trap. That the top part of the bin on the left actually has a solid, clear roof on it, so that if the crow pulls the food through the left, it's not going to fall into that left bin. So in this case, the birds overwhelmingly were able to solve the problem by pulling the food to the left and hence away from the blue rim. So what this shows is that they don't need the yellow disc on the top of that left bin as a cue in order to solve this problem. Of course, it leaves open the possibility that they're using the blue rim on the right as a cue to solving the problem. But is that what they're doing? So in the second set of transfer trials, they changed the disc's colors and removed the blue rim. Right, so all the original colors are removed. The bin on the right has a black disc on the bottom, and the bin on the left has a black rim on the top. Now, even though all the original cues were gone, they still solved the problem correctly. Oh, and I should also point out that in all of these tasks, the direction that they had to pull varied. So sometimes they had to pull to the right and sometimes to the left. And I did that by changing the orientation of the device. So what Taylor and colleagues suggest is that the birds are using some kind of knowledge about holes while they're solving this problem, and they're not simply relying on these simple color-based cues. So do they use some knowledge about holes? So this led to the third and final transfer, well, the third and final version of this set of transfer trials. In this one, the yellow disc was removed from the left bin, and here there was no clear roof on top of that left bin, so that when they pulled the food to the left, it could actually fall through, and they could get the food that way. The only thing that remained was the yellow disc on the bottom of the right. So now there's two holes: the one on the left of the tube, and then the one on the bottom of the left bin. So when they were presented with this problem, the crows appeared confused. They would stare at it and not be able to figure out what to do, right? Because they know that you can't drag food across a surface with a hole in it because it'll fall in. So they were afraid to do that because they were afraid of losing the food. So they see the two holes and then they're confused about what to do. Right? The two holes, one in the left bin and one on the left side of the tube. So what this suggests is that they had learned something about holes, and they had learned that there's something about holes that are causally relevant to solving the problem. Of course, they didn't need to be confused. They could have pulled the food to the left, and it would have fallen through the bottom of the left bin, and they would have been able to eat it. Alright, so in the first two transfer tasks, the three of the crows were successful at solving the problem. 3 were not successful. And they weren't relying on simple color-based cues to solve the problem. Right? So they've seemed to learn something about holes during the learning phase, something about the fact that objects can't move across a surface that has a hole in it without falling into it. So this is some kind of causal knowledge about the nature of the task. Now, if they have this kind of causal knowledge, right, about holes, they should be able to transfer it to other problems, right, novel problems. And they did this in a fourth transfer trial using a very different paradigm called the trap table. And you can see the setup here. So food is placed on either end of this trap table, but one end, in this case the right side, has a hole in it. So the animal is given a stick, and they have to choose which food to try to get, the one on the left or the one on the right. Well, which one would you go for? Obviously the one on the left, because if you try to get the one on the right using the stick, it's going to fall in. So importantly, in its visual characteristics, the trap table problem looks very different from the trap tube problem. Right? They're different in color, shape, and material. Nonetheless, the 3 crows that were successful at the trap tube problem were able to solve the trap table problem. Right? They know to get the food from the side that doesn't have the hole. And the 3 crows that were not able to solve the trap tube problem were also not able to solve the trap table problem. So they lacked that causal knowledge. So what's interesting also in their discussion to their paper, Taylor et al. Point out that they designed their studies to be similar to ones carried out with primates. And they point out that their results are very different from what Ordus et al. Found using primates. Right? They found that individuals from 4 ape species were unable to transfer knowledge from the trap tube problem to the trap table problem and vice versa. Right? So learning to solve one didn't enable them to solve the other and the other way around. So New Caledonia crows seem unique in their ability to transfer abstract causal knowledge from one problem to another, even if that problem is superficially very different. So this is important because it shows that there might be a glimmer of analogical reasoning present in these birds. And we'll be discussing the topic of analogical reasoning and things like that in future lectures. All right, to summarize, these specific crows seem able to engage in planning and in pursuing particular goals. They choose tools that are appropriate to the task at hand, and many can solve the trap tube and trap table problem flexibly. So for whatever reason, these particular birds appear to have greater understanding of physical relations between objects than do many other animal species. right? Corvids, right? Members of the corvid category of birds seem to be very good at solving many types of problems. So one conclusion that I want to derive from this is that we have to get away from this bias that we have towards primates, and assuming that primates, because they're more similar to us, are likely to have more cognitive abilities than members of other types of species. Right? Many bird species seem to outshine many primates in measures of cognitive ability. So that tells you something. You just, calling someone a bird brain isn't necessarily an insult. Calling someone a chimpanzee, though, is probably an insult. Anyway, we'll continue this discussion of birds and their ability to solve complex problems in future lectures.